You spray it, it disappears. Then it comes back somewhere new. There's an old trick that doesn't kill a single bug. It just makes them show themselves. And what it catches overnight is more than most people expect. The trick costs about $1, and it works while you sleep, but not for the reason most people assume. Silverfish don't die from a spray. Most of the time, they simply move to a part of your house where you can't see them, then come right back once the smell fades. If you've ever sprayed under the sink or around the baseboards and watched them vanish for a few days, only to spot one crawling across the bathroom tile at midnight 2 weeks later, you already know this pattern. That's not bad luck. That's how silverfish behave when you treat the surface and never touch the actual reason they're there in the first place. In the next few minutes, I'll show you the $1 trap that pulls them out of hiding overnight, the real reason your house is attracting them in the first place. The mistake that makes people think the trap stopped working after a few days, and the two-layer system that keeps them from ever building numbers again. Here's what almost everyone does first. You see one silverfish, maybe near the tub or behind a stack of old magazines, and you reach for whatever spray is under the sink. You hit it directly, watch it curl up, and feel like the problem is handled. For a few days, nothing. The bathroom looks clean. Then one night you flip on the light, and there's another one, this time near the baseboard by the closet. So you spray again. This cycle can repeat for months, and here's the part that trips people up. The spray isn't failing because it's weak. It's failing because a single silverfish sighting was never the actual population. Silverfish are nocturnal and extremely good at staying out of sight during the day. For everyone you see out in the open, there are often several more living inside wall voids, behind baseboards, under flooring, or inside stacks of paper and cardboard you haven't touched in months. Killing the one that wandered into view does nothing to the ones still breeding in a dark, humid gap you've never even looked at. To understand why they keep coming back, you have to understand what a silverfish actually needs to survive, because it's narrower than you'd think. Silverfish require high humidity, generally somewhere in the 75 to 95% range, and they need a steady food source rich in starch or cellulose. That includes the glue in book bindings, wallpaper paste, cardboard, cotton fabric, and even the starch sizing in some paper products. This is why silverfish problems cluster in very specific rooms. Bathrooms with poor ventilation, basements, closets with stored boxes, and areas around leaky pipes. They're not randomly wandering your house looking for you. They're following humidity and food. And if your home has a damp, dark spot with either of those two things present, that spot becomes a breeding ground, not just a hiding place. A female silverfish can lay eggs continuously through her life, and those eggs are laid in cracks and crevices near the food and moisture source, which means the population doesn't spread outward from one central nest the way ants do. Instead, you end up with multiple separate colonies, quietly building up in every humid, cluttered corner of the house. That's why spraying one visible bug rarely solves anything. You're treating a single ant on the counter and ignoring an entire colony structure you can't see. Once you understand that, the goal changes. Instead of hunting individual bugs, you want to find out exactly where the activity is concentrated, because that tells you which humid zone is feeding the problem. This is where the $1 trick comes in, and it's almost embarrassingly simple. Take an empty glass jar, something like a mason jar or even a cleaned-out pasta sauce jar, and wrap the outside completely in a strip of masking tape or paper tape from top to bottom. The tape gives the silverfish enough grip to climb up the outside of the jar. Drop a small piece of starchy bait inside. A bit of dry cereal, a scrap of bread, or a small piece of cardboard works well. Then set the jar on its side or upright in the area where you've spotted activity. Silverfish can climb the taped exterior easily, but once they drop down onto the smooth glass interior to reach the food, they can't climb back out. It's not poison, it's not a chemical, and it costs whatever a piece of tape and an empty jar costs you, which is close to nothing. Leave it out overnight in a bathroom, closet, or basement corner, and by morning you'll often have a very clear answer about whether you have a real problem and where it's coming from. Here's exactly how to set this up, so it actually tells you something useful. Place jars, and you'll want at least 2 or 3 around the house, not just one in the specific rooms where you've seen activity, and prioritize spots that are naturally dark and humid. Under the bathroom sink, behind the toilet, in a closet corner, or near a basement wall. Leave them overnight, undisturbed, because silverfish are far more active after dark. And a jar checked at 9 p.m. is going to look very different from the same jar checked before bed and then again in the morning. In the morning, check every jar before you clean anything else in the house. This part matters more than people realize, because if you vacuum or wipe down surfaces first, you can disturb pheromone trails and food debris that silverfish are following, which changes your results the next night. Just check the jars, note what you find, and then go about your day. Now here's the mistake that ruins this for a lot of people. They set out one jar in one room, check it after a single night, and if it's empty or only has one silverfish, they conclude the problem is minor or already solved. That's backwards. A single jar only tells you about the humidity and food conditions in that exact spot. If you skip the bathroom because you assume the kitchen is the real problem, you can completely miss an active breeding zone that's been building for months. The trap isn't a treatment, it's a diagnostic tool. And treating one empty jar as proof the house is clear is like checking one drawer in your house for cash and assuming you know your total savings. Run multiple jars across multiple rooms for at least 2 to 3 nights before you draw any conclusions. Once you know which areas are active, you're ready for what actually stops the problem instead of just monitoring it. This is where a lot of homeowners get stuck, because the jar trap by itself will catch bugs, but it won't shrink a population that's still breeding in a wall void you can't reach with tape and glass. The first few nights, you might actually catch more silverfish than you expected, and that's not a bad sign. That's the trap finally intercepting insects that were already active in that zone before you ever noticed them. Over the next several nights, if the humidity and food conditions in that room haven't changed, catch numbers will likely plateau rather than drop to 0, because you're only removing the individuals that happen to wander across that specific spot, not the ones still breeding a few feet away behind the wall. That's why the second layer matters, and it targets the actual condition that let the population grow in the first place: humidity. Silverfish cannot survive long-term in low humidity environments. Generally, anything under about 50% starts to work against them. If the room where your jars are catching the most activity is a bathroom without a working exhaust fan, a basement with visible dampness, or a closet against an exterior wall that tends to feel damp, that environment is doing more to sustain the population than any single food source. Running a small dehumidifier in a problem basement, using the bathroom exhaust fan every time you shower and for 20 minutes after, and fixing any slow leaks under sinks or around window seals will do more to collapse an active silverfish population over 2 to 3 weeks than any spray ever will. This isn't a one-night fix, and it shouldn't be marketed as one. It's a slower, structural change that removes the reason silverfish chose that spot to begin with. Alongside humidity control, you want to remove or seal off their food sources in that same zone. That means going through stored boxes in closets or basements and switching cardboard for plastic storage bins, since cardboard is essentially a silverfish buffet. Old stacks of newspaper, unused wallpaper, and books stored in humid areas are worth relocating to a drier part of the house or sealing in plastic totes. You don't need to throw everything away. You just need to stop leaving a steady food supply sitting in the exact humid conditions silverfish already prefer. With those 2 layers running, monitoring with the jar traps and reducing humidity plus food access, you have a system where each part does a different job. The jar traps tell you where activity is concentrated and give you a rough sense of whether numbers are climbing or falling over time. The humidity reduction removes the environmental condition that lets eggs develop and adults survive long-term. The food source cleanup removes the reason they settled in that specific spot instead of somewhere else in the house. None of these 3 pieces alone solves the full problem, but together they explain both the disappearance you'll notice fairly quickly and the fact that the problem doesn't quietly rebuild itself a month later, which is what usually happens when people rely on spray alone. In terms of what to expect, the first night or 2 with jars out, you'll likely see the clearest results, since you're catching insects that were already moving through that space. Over the following 1 to 2 weeks, as you improve ventilation and reduce moisture, nighttime catch counts in an actively managed room typically start to decline, though this depends heavily on how severe the humidity problem was to begin with and how long it had been running unchecked. A bathroom with a fan that's been used consistently for years and just has 1 damp corner might show real improvement within a week. A basement that's been consistently humid for a long stretch of time may take 3 to 4 weeks of consistent dehumidifier use before catch numbers drop meaningfully. If you're past the 2-week mark with a dehumidifier running and you're still seeing consistent catches in the same jar, that's usually a sign there's a moisture source you haven't identified yet, like a slow pipe leak or condensation building behind a wall. And at that point, it's worth having a plumber check for hidden leaks rather than assuming the trap or the dehumidifier isn't working. Now let's talk about cost, because this is where the contrast really shows up. A can of general insect spray runs somewhere in the range of $5 to $8. And if you're using it every couple of weeks because visible bugs keep returning, that adds up over a few months to something well beyond what a small dehumidifier or a jar trap would ever cost you. The jar trap itself, Using a jar and tape you likely already have costs close to nothing. A small basement or closet dehumidifier is a one-time purchase that keeps working for years. And depending on the unit, it can end up costing less over a single season than 3 or 4 months of repeat insect spray purchases, while actually addressing the underlying humidity problem instead of masking it. That doesn't mean spray has no place. If you find a genuinely large population inside a wall void or under flooring that jar traps and humidity control aren't touching, a residual insecticide labeled specifically for silverfish, applied according to the label directions in cracks and crevices, can be a reasonable next step. Or in more severe or structural infestations, a licensed pest control technician can identify hidden colonies that are difficult for a homeowner to reach safely. Before you assume this system has failed if results are slow, walk through a couple of honest possibilities first. If you're catching silverfish consistently in one spot despite weeks of lower humidity, double-check that the room is actually staying under that 50% range, since a small portable dehumidifier can struggle in a large or poorly sealed basement space and might need to run longer, or you may need a larger capacity unit. It's also worth confirming you're dealing with silverfish and not a similar-looking insect like a firebrat, which behaves similarly but tolerates slightly different conditions. And if you're seeing activity in multiple unconnected rooms rather than one concentrated zone, that usually points to a broader whole-house humidity issue, possibly tied to ventilation or a crawl space, rather than one isolated leak, which is a bigger project but still solvable with the same core principles applied more broadly. At the start of this, seeing a silverfish on the bathroom floor probably felt like the entire problem. Now you know that single insect was just the visible edge of a colony that was likely breeding somewhere humid and dark that you hadn't checked yet. The jar trap doesn't just kill bugs. It tells you exactly where to focus your attention. The humidity and food source changes remove the reason that spot became a breeding ground in the first place. And once both of those pieces are working together, you're not spraying the same 3 rooms every few weeks hoping for a different result. You're addressing the actual system that let the problem start. If you've dealt with silverfish before, tell me where you're seeing them most. The bathroom, a closet, or somewhere in the basement, because that alone usually tells a lot about what's driving it. If you're tired of buying spray that only works for a few days at a time, subscribe, because the next video breaks down a similar problem hiding in your bathroom drain. One that most people keep pouring drain cleaner into without touching the part where the real issue is actually developing. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.